I remain ambivalent with reasons and arguments for and against the existence of God. So here's my problem. I'm told that to know whether there is a God, I must first believe in God. But wouldn't that push me onto a circular path of self-deception? Asking myself, why should I believe in God, throws me off balance, out of my comfort zone of reasons and arguments. I don't enjoy the vertigo. I go to London to meet Sarah Coakley, professor of divinity at Cambridge. Sarah is a sophisticated, systematic theologian and a perceptive Anglican priest. How will she take to me, a struggling scientist, amateur theologian, and ambivalent believer?
Sarah, I will admit to you two things. One, I would like to believe in God, and two, I really don't. Why should I believe in God?
My answer to that would be very different depending on what's motivating you. In other words, is it because you feel uneasy about an option that you've never really considered? Is it because you feel drawn out of yourself towards some questions that you have evaded all your life? Is it because, completely hypothetically, there's some suffering in your life that you feel...
Sounds like I should lie down on a couch.
Well, I'm very reluctant as a theologian and as a priest to answer that question as if it were on some kind of flat plane with no personal interest involved.
Let me answer that question. I would love to believe in God because that would give meaning to the universe and my life. It would give at least the only possible hope of a life after death. So I have every reason to want to believe in God and would like to believe in God, but that's exactly why I am concerned, because I have the desire that the end product of that would be generated by my desire rather than by reality. And the last thing I want to do is fool myself.
Absolutely. So what are the conditions under which you could conceive of being drawn to believe in a way that you weren't duping yourself?
I don't know. And I have said that I think if God exists, it's up to God to figure out how I can believe. That's why I'm coming to you.
And
you're closer than I am.
Well, perhaps you shouldn't presume that. That's not a presumption I would make, actually. I'm very serious about that.
Okay.
But the reason I press you on what do you seek, that's a very old question asked to monks when they come to the monastery. Quid pettis? What do you seek? Because I think that is the core question that should be at the center when people say, why do you believe in God?
But that's idiosyncratic. That's just about me. It shouldn't be about me. I want it to be about reality. I want it independent of me.
Now, why is reality and you somehow separable? I mean, why do you think that's a problem?
Reality would be reality if I existed or I did not.
That is true. But why do you think that reflecting on your own spiritual state and your own desires is somehow...
Because I think that would affect my analysis of the problem or my desire to want God to exist. I do want God to exist.
All right, so you think that, say, in science, you can investigate matters in science, not bringing any of your desires or interests into the matter?
Certainly there is personal involvement in anything in science, but what you'd have at the end of the day in science is that you have objective reality that is pretty much agreed to across cultures, which you do not find in religion.
That is perfectly true. But you see, the reason I'm asking you this is not to trick you. The thing I'm most interested in relation to arguments for God's existence, which I don't in any way sneer at, by the way. It's been very popular in the last generation of theology to think that arguments for God's existence are a waste of time and that we can withdraw into our kind of sectarian realms of religious practice and not bother with people who don't believe. This seems to me a tragic intellectual mistake. But arguments as such, they would not engage you unless your will was somehow turned towards the reality that might lie behind them. And that's why I've been pressing this what do you seek question.
So what you're saying is that if there's some predisposition, some will to believe that the arguments for God would be received in a different way.
Exactly.
That's what scares me. That's exactly what scares. It's what I don't want.
So you think that would necessarily be a matter of self-duping?
I would worry about that.
Right. But what are the conditions under which that worry might be relieved? I'm still pressing you on this.
I don't know.
Let's say that God is reaching out to you in some way to work on this this niggle that you have, that you would like to believe in God. And let's say that there are some arenas of your life which have a sort of element of vulnerability in them, of love, of desire, of pain, where God could get in. Under what conditions do you think that might lead to something?
I have all of those, as does everyone. And if I would begin to believe in God through any one of those windows, it would make me nervous. I just don't want to be in a position of fooling myself or arrogating to myself some relationship with the spiritual realities when such is not the case.
You seem to be operating with an extraordinarily individualistic notion of the intellectual life, in which you and you alone are responsible for everything you do and think.
So that's one problem I may have.
Yes, and this strikes me as not really true to any of our intellectual endeavors. It seems to me that the reason you haven't got very far in what you say is a desire to believe in God is that you have this rather strange, abstract, arid vision of a sort of space in which you would be completely uncontaminated by any previous authoritative
No, I am contaminated, and every contamination I've had pushed me in the opposite direction.
Away from religion.
Yes.
Because religion has been responsible for such negative...
For a lot of reasons. I'm not one to say because religion has had so many negatives in terms of wars and persecutions that I reject the fundamentals of religion. I'm not of that kind.
So your quest for the deep reality of life, which seems to animate these programs, seems to me to have some spiritual dimension to it.
Yeah,
it may not find its place in any particular practice of religion at the moment, but it clearly is an itch. You wouldn't be making all these programs if you didn't find this an ultimately fascinating question.
And it's not only to find an answer, but it's to deal with the questions themselves.
Exactly.
Because if you deal with the questions themselves, I feel that is enormous progress.
I would want to say, over against a huge number of moves in recent philosophy of religion and theology against arguments for God's existence, that I would be very happy to lay out a range of arguments why it seems to me very rational to believe in God, including profoundly experiential reasons, which I suspect that you share a little bit more than you're owning up to at the moment. I just have that little feeling as a priest. And then I would say, let's look at these arguments. And then I would ask you the big existential question, which is, where are true joys to be found? Which is to circle back to that question, what are you seeking? Because if these arguments simply add up to a range of quite arid, abstract, propositional possibilities, then they're not grabbing you existentially in the way that they would if you were actually prepared to put your life on the line in terms of practices. Because I, as a priest, I, as a believer, find that it is in silent waiting on God that ultimate, transcendent reality impinges on me. And every time I do that, I think of it as a kind of rehearsal for the moment when I finally have to give over control, which will be the moment when I die. And as a priest, I think rehearsing for death is actually one of the most important things we do as humans, because once we're no longer afraid of death, then we're no longer afraid of life. And you strike me as a person who's very interested in controlling what you believe in for fear that you might fall victim to some kind of Kantian heteronomy, where you would no longer be in charge, the captain of your own soul. But when you come to think of it, there's going to come a day when you're lying in bed about to die, and that possibility will no longer be a fantasy that you can maintain. So perhaps what's a little bit different about the way I approach arguments for the existence of God is to think about the context of desire, transformative practices, and ultimate longing, which ultimately I think can't be fully taken account of in terms of totting up the relative value of arguments.
I appreciate Sarah's concern for me, though I admit a sense of discomfort, feeling the force of her penetrating insights. Rehearsing for death. I do fear death. Sarah sees that. I shudder at the finality of utter non-existence. I'd wish to be no longer afraid. But before I give in to easy answers, I seek out the other side.